Hello, my fellow archaeogastronomers. Welcome to the latest episode of our mini-series Adventures in Wine. My name is Thomas Dinas, and this is the Delicious Legacy podcast. When we talk about wine, we are inevitably, I guess, and without forcing our mind, casting our thoughts primarily to Europe, then to New World wines like in Americas, North and South, and of course Australia, New Zealand, and so on and so on. But there is something strangely amiss. The other half of the Mediterranean basin, the motherlands of ancient wines, the cradle of many commerce and trading civilizations, the lake of the Roman Empire, the whole of North Africa and the Middle East, huge swathes of fertile and productive lands, renowned for their wines for millennia. You know, the proper old world wines. Old world wines. Why this blindness persists in our globalised age? And what's the colonial legacy of the winemaking and vine growing on these lands? In today's episode, I am joined by Aghiles Ourad of the Other Grape, where he helps me to grasp the concept of winemaking in predominantly Muslim countries and tackle some thorny issues, from the difficulties of producing wine in these countries to exporting it and creating a viable commercial product. Plus, we'll touch on the legacy of colonial France and colonialism in wine in general. Aghiles, with his project The Other Grape, he tells wine stories from the Arab world and beyond. And his passion is about discovering these unexplored wines from local producers from the south side or the other side of the Mediterranean, which are usually underrepresented in the more conventional wine markets. So he really has a lot of knowledge in the subject. Did you know that less than 100 years ago, Algeria was the fourth biggest exporter of wine in the world? Aghiles is specializing in wines from Algeria, Lebanon and Turkey, and we will learn many interesting new ideas today, so stay tuned and enjoy. As an intro, I'll say that Turkey and Lebanon, and what we call Iran today, the might ancient Persia, were part of the cradle of winemaking. Wine was first made and drunk there. The techniques adopted later by Greeks and Romans developed in that vast, fertile and productive area. Also, is the Syrah grape and the Shiraz region in Iran in any way connected? After all, from around 800 BCE, ancient Phoenician merchant sailors from the coastal Middle East, what we call today Lebanon and Syria, created commercial hubs and trading stations all over North Africa and Spain. For example, Carthage being the biggest and most famous, but also Cadiz, which is still going strong at the edge of the then known world. Doubtless, they exported their winemaking and grape growing there, more than 2,600 years ago. So I think we should all pay some respect, listen to their winemaking advice, and most importantly, drink their wine. Enjoy! Hi Aghiles, welcome to the Delicious Legacy.
Hi Thomas, thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited to talk to you about all your knowledge about the wines that come from, not from Europe basically, right?
Yeah, essentially there's a few reasons to our name. It's called we've called our business the Other Grape, and that pertains to like the other side of the Mediterranean. So we all know wines from Spain, Italy, France, right, which are the northern banks of the Mediterranean. But we wanted to showcase and promote wines from the southern banks of the Mediterranean. So it's North Africa and the Eastern Med as well. So the Levant region. And so the name is the Other Grape because of the other side of the Mediterranean, but it's also pertains to kind of the political other. And so in Europe, there's we often exclude people of Middle Eastern origin as the other, especially over the past 20 years, the famous war on terrorism. So we wanted to talk about the other in wine as well, wine that's made exclusively in kind of the Arab world and beyond.
Yeah, great. So, where are you from?
So I'm originally Algerian. I was born in Algiers, but I grew up in the UK.
And I don't think many people know, but Algeria used to have a really big wine production up until the 60s or something. Am I wrong?
No, not at all. I think even a decade further. So even until the early 1970s, around 1971, Algeria was still the fourth biggest producer of wine in the world. It was a legacy of French colonialism. But essentially what happened was, at the time, the president of Algeria, a man called Boumediene, for a few reasons, decided to uproot most of the country's vines. And so this is almost the equivalent today of America as the fourth biggest producer, suddenly deciding that it doesn't, it's going to uproot all their vines and damage the wine industry, the miners at least.
Yeah, and obviously not only the wine industry, but the economy of the country.
Yeah. So this was a country that was effectively 10 years old, not even 10 years old.
Yeah.
And so it was the economy of the country, which had up until then been one that was based on, of course, like exploitation, but strong agro capitalism, had been, if you want, oiled, lubricated by wine. Algeria was the biggest exporter of wine in the world up until that point. Most of it going to France, which was, it was part of the same country. So exportations is kind of in inverted commas. But yeah, so there was, Boumediene was almost trying to push Algeria through a cultural and agricultural revolution. What that meant was that he was trying to replace a lot of the vines in the country with wheat, a crop that Algerians consume, in his own words, and create like a strong agrarian reform. But unfortunately, that didn't work because Algeria nationalized its oil and gas industry, and as I'm sure you're aware, that kind of ruins the resource curse, affects all other types of
right. Yeah. So the recent history of, let's say, Algerian wine, at least, it's not that great, but obviously it goes back to thousands of years. I would say. So, what's your knowledge of the history of that? How far ago do you go in terms of where can you trace roots of all these different Middle Eastern, let's say, and North African wines?
It's funny because in the wine world, right, we talk of the new world of being, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, America, right? Places where places where grapes were taken, by settlers and planted, and now they have really like burgeoning wine industries. But I like to think of North Africa and the Middle East, with the Levant, and Turkey being the new old world, if you want, or old new world. I'm not sure how it would work, but these are places of antiquity, right, where grapes actually come from. So the like Anatolia regions, where through kind of DNA analysis, we can tell that grapes are from this place in Georgia. Carbon dating has showed us that this is where wine was made over 6,000 years ago. So this is the world from which grapes come, and it's where you'll find grapes growing naturally as well, just in the wild. So I remember in my youth in Algeria, just finding grapes growing, and we would pick grapes from vines, much like you do to pick figs from trees or whatever. This is a place of abundance in terms of the vine, and these were under ancient civilization. So the Phoenicians, who exported it westwards, the ancient Egyptians, who had a royal wine industry, and would have the names of winemakers and different vineyards on the amphora, all the way to the Romans, who grew grapes for the empire in North Africa. You find mosaics in Algeria of harvest time during grapes. So this is a region where where winemaking and grape growing and winemaking was absolutely natural. And since Islam spread into the region, that it's been a bit stop and start. Let's say
Yeah, it's always difficult, but still going on. And tell us a bit about I don't know your favorite wines. I would guess. I mean, so you'll have something from Algeria, I suppose, something from Lebanon, Turkey. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So that what's fascinating about about these grapes is that you have indigenous varieties. So everyone will know what a Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and if you maybe about Spanish wines, you'll know Garnacha is Rioja, or if you go over to Italy, Nebbiolo. So these are wines that are internationally recognized and ones that are planted in the New World, such as in the Southern Hemisphere. I think what's fascinating about these grapes from this region, especially the Levant and Turkey, is that there's a strong focus on indigenous varieties now, and up until now they've been mostly made into sweet wine. So the wines of antiquity really were quite sweet, so you would really drink them because they were, these like delicious elixirs, of sweetness.
Mm-hmm.
And, this is what people liked back then. And it was only with the arrival of the French really in the Levant, in Lebanon, even in North Africa and Algeria, where the dry kind of style variety, which is a bit more kind of acidic and the kind of taste we're used to now. Only with this did these they're like the wine industries of Lebanon and North Africa and Algeria especially really take on this kind of style, this dry style we know today.
Right.
And what's fascinating about these places now is that many of the winemakers are adapting their indigenous grapes to this kind of variety, to making dry style wines. And it's great because you have many different taste profiles that you're really not used to. So there's some really, really, really good ones that I recommend to people, like Obeidi or Merwa in Lebanon. And in Turkey you have good reds like Okuzguzu. There's some really, really nice
Basically,
ones.
The profile was sweet. So for centuries or thousands of years, basically, the wine was consumed that it was a sweeter wine, like the Muscat or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And do we have descriptions and sources for it? Do you know any of that?
Yeah. So there's a book edited by Michael Karam about wine the history of wine in the Middle East. And there are a few chapters in there about that really talk about wine. So it's called Tears of Bacchus, A History of Wine in the Middle East, but edited by Michael Karam, and it's a collection of essays and chapters written by people who have a bit of knowledge on this subject. And you have essentially examples in Lebanon of winemaking through the centuries.
Yeah,
because in this region, especially because of Christian communities, you have some kind of you have winemaking that is rooted in tradition, in religious rituals, and which are places of travel, for people at the time. So you would go to visit a Maronite monastery, for example, and stay there, and you would be treated with with the wines of the time, and you have English travel logs who would write about these sweet elixirs in Lebanon that they would try. So you have a huge tradition of these kind of wines in definitely in modern day Lebanon.
Yeah, fantastic. And with regards to Algerian wines, do you make mostly white or red wine?
Good question. So I think it is mostly red.
Yeah.
You have so red. I think the red just works in the hotter temperatures a little bit more. I think whites require a little bit more of they require kind of the cooling, moderating factors a bit more than reds. Reds I think can usually reach higher like alcohol content, and that's because there's more sugar in the grape while it's fermenting, and the higher sugar content comes from the fact that it's warmer as well in these countries. So there are some good, really nice reds. And what's interesting is that in Algeria you have reds that the French planted,
Yeah.
and they are mostly reds that are like nice and that can deal well with the hot temperatures, right? That are relatively drought resistant. So like the Cinsault, like Garnacha, Grenache, the Mourvèdre or Monastrell. So these are grapes that can really shoot down their roots down into the ground and pick up any moisture that is necessary, even if it hasn't been raining for months. So they make for really, really nice kind of medium-bodied, dried, jammy fruit flavors, and it's really beautiful because it represents the Algerian soil really quite well.
Fantastic! It sounds really good. And I suppose, with climate change, these varieties may become more popular in the northern shores of the Mediterranean.
Yeah, definitely. I think what's funny is that these varieties, we were speaking about indigenous grapes before, right? So these are varieties that are almost fought over as well. You have in Sardinia, you have what's called the Colonial di Sardegna is what it's called, and this is something that is almost. The Sardinians are quite proud to have this grape as their own, but in fact, Colonial is also known as Grenache or Garnacha.
Right.
And so you have the Spanish. I think it's around Valencia, if I'm not mistaken, who say that actually, in fact, Garnacha is Spanish. So what's funny about this story is that we fight over maybe whose grape it belongs to, but they're very Mediterranean. I think this is a good reflection of what I'm trying to get across with the Other Grape, is that to move away from this kind of European Middle Eastern or Arab world dichotomy narrative and move more towards a Mediterranean discourse.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think this is what the wine world is good at showing, in that there is no border necessarily between. It's only recently, right, that travel over land has been quicker than travel over sea. And so we see like now the geographical space changing, more focused towards Europe. But in fact, before, so much trade and commerce was moved across the Mediterranean cities. And so I think this is reflective in the wines themselves. So you have, for example, in Algeria, a white that is grown is Merceguera, which is I think officially a Spanish grape, but it's you can never know which side of the Mediterranean it started on first, right? So yeah. The climates are the same.
Exactly. I tend to say also the people are very similar, very open and friendly and hospitable and all that. And there's more things that connect us than separate us. I don't think I've met anyone from the Levant region that is not pretty much like a brother to me.
Yeah, they force you to eat as well, which
yes. Sounds like my grandmother's. Yeah, exactly. So we have Algerian wine, we have Tunisian wine.
Yeah.
Do you have found any Egyptian wine?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
What's funny is that today the Egyptian wine industry is very, very limited. You have so I mentioned I've talked about Christian communities within Muslim majority countries, being quite present, quite active in the winemaking, I think, which is quite normal. And it's the same in Egypt. So you have Coptic Christians who of course are allowed to drink, and so they partake in winemaking. I think it's also got to do with some religious rituals. But I've heard that in Egypt there are two wineries, at least one, maybe two. That was what I've heard from an Egyptian. But of course it's very limited, and one of the issues we find in kind of this region, the South and East Mediterranean, is that alcohol production and consumption is quite close to what the state is, quite controlled by the state, right? Whether that's through official, official production numbers, or like how the diktats on how much wine can be produced, to how much wine can be drunk and where it can be drunk, right? They usually hold licenses. They're the ones that give out licenses for bars and restaurants and stuff. So we see that it's very influenced by the state, and the state is obviously influenced by politics, and so they usually play the religious card the way they want, right? If they feel like they need more religious support, alcohol is one of the, I guess, easiest targets, right, to show that show that the state is a bit more religious. So I think it's very limited for this reason in Egypt as well. But what's funny is that the ancient Egyptians were huge winemakers, incredible winemakers, and you see these in paintings in tombs. There are kind of paintings of harvests, of winemaking. You have hieroglyphics of the vine. This was a fundamental part of their lives and their rituals. And you have along the Nile, it was this incredible fertile ground where vines could grow. And before the French came onto the stage, the capital, if you want, of winemaking was the other side of the Mediterranean and in Egypt, on the Nile. Right. And so it kind of inverts, if you want, the kind of orthodoxy, right? What we see today as the main wine center. And it puts it from one side of the Mediterranean onto the other.
I mean, if we go to the ancient world, France, which was France, was obviously the Gauls, the Northern Europeans. They were big drinkers. So the wine drinkers were on the other side of the Mediterranean.
Absolutely. And this is what the first. Kind of the Phoenicians and then the kind of Etruscans, that started making wine and heading northwards up, kind of up the, I think it's the Rhine up to Germany, and then into France. This is the kind of the obstacles that they faced. That people were very happy with their beer and their meads,
Also, I mean, transporting wine far north, it would go off as well, I suppose. It wouldn't taste good. So great. And do you want to talk about your own history and your own wine adventures, and talk about that a little bit? Yeah, sure. So I think this time last year we launched the Other Grape, so myself and two others. As part of a project, it was to understand the kind of viability of promoting wine in from the Arab world and beyond, the other side of the Mediterranean in the UK. We noticed that within the UK there was, London is kind of the centre, if you want, one of the capitals of wine. In the world, right? You can find wine from pretty much everywhere here, and we thought, there's a distinct lack of wine from this region, even though it's very nearby. So we wanted to dig deeper and try and set out a pilot project to understand whether this kind of business was viable or not. And this stemmed from myself, like a personal project, one from like kind of identity. I'm British. I'm a dual British Algerian national, and in the British side of me, drinking is a fundamental part of the culture, and the Algerian side of me, it's more in Algeria, it's like really taboo, really quite taboo. Drinking in the open is quite rare, and you won't tell if someone drinks. You don't necessarily tell your parents or your family that you do, right? So you keep it to yourself. So it was, for me, this was an idea to try and reconcile that, especially after I'd lived in Algeria for a few months, and I realized that, actually Algeria makes wine, and that we make really good wine. And then once I delved a bit deeper into the history, I knew that I had to tell the stories and try and bring this wine here. So we launched a project starting with Algerian Lebanese wine to see what people's reactions would be. Excellent. And what's the future?
The future is to go a bit slower. So what I realized that wine, so making wine is a slow process, right? You have to be patient. It's all about the kind of fermentation and then the development of the flavors within within the vats or the barrels, and then within the bottle and things like that. And then so the wine world is one that is quite slow, and this is reflected also in if you want the education of kind of wine drinkers as well, and so it takes a while for a wine's reputation to take hold.
Yeah.
And so what we found is that it's quite difficult to compete with very well-established winemaking countries, and like France, Italy, Spain, and those of the new world in the Southern Hemisphere. So yeah, it's because of many structural issues to do with this wine. Poor transport links, economic, political upheaval, the lack of political will for government bodies to promote their wine industries. Again, they're in Muslim majority countries, so there's political issues surrounding that. It's not that easy to compete in. What it does is it raises the price per bottle, and so it's not that easy to compete with well-established names.
Yeah, unfortunately, the market economics dictate.
Exactly. Fundamentally, it always comes down to this. And so if someone is making a choice between a 15-pound bottle of Algerian wine or Lebanese wine and French or Italian wine, most of the time they'll go for what they know.
Yeah.
But once they know the stories behind the wine, we found the human stories and the stories of struggle and all the links to colonialism and all these like fascinating sides to the wine, and they're very happy to try it. So what I think the future is for the Other Grape now is to really visit all the vineyards around the area and build out our own network and understanding and our own brand and reputation, so that hopefully we can come back stronger in a few years.
Great, that's lovely. Yeah, because I suppose we need to educate the people, right, about all that stuff that you just talked, and that takes time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Today's episode is brought to you with the welcome support of Malbin Greek, UK's leading Greek delicatessen supplier and distributor of premium Greek produce, be it wine, herbs, cheeses or olive oil, from all over the wild corners of the country, and working directly with family and artisan producers. Why not try the Ktima Vouvoukeli Limnio, a red wine from Avdira, North Greece, the homeland of Democritus. Limnio is a truly ancient and very much praised red wine since antiquity, and from no other than Aristotle himself. Deep red, framboise color with red forest fruits in the aroma, along with black pepper, cardamom and curry notes, spicy texture and long aftertaste. Or if you prefer a white wine, then the special Domaine Sigalas Barrel Santorini PDO Assyrtiko is for you. A barrel fermented Assyrtiko which demonstrates the aging qualities of the variety, deep lemon color and a complex nose with citrus fruits and wood notes, round and smooth in the mouth, with the acidity being the backbone that allows it to age. The vines are classified as old vines and are over 50 years in age. The rejuvenation of the vineyards employs the same technique from antiquity to the present day. This is truly a unique wine that deserves to be more well known. Whatever your needs, Malbin Greek has you covered. You can shop online and have the divine and delicious goods delivered to your doorstep across the UK, or you can visit the shop at Arch 17 Apollo Business Park, Lucy Way, SC16 4ET, Bermondsey, London. Malbin Greek, the one-stop shop for your Greek fix. We haven't touched, we just touched around the edge about colonialism in wine, but we haven't really gone into it. Do you want to touch on that a little bit more in depth? Do you want to talk a bit about it?
It's a fascinating story. One that the story of colonialism in Algeria, and I'll touch a little bit on Lebanon later. It's a slightly different story, but in Algeria, for those that I guess that don't know, the French invaded in 1830. And essentially settled in Algeria, sent over a lot of settlers, not only French but also Spanish, Italian, Maltese, right? A lot of Europeans, and stayed until 1962, till after the War of Independence. waged by the FLN, Front de Libération Nationale. And so during this time, we saw gradual settlement of not only the major cities but also the countrysides. And what the French actually did was initially wanted to make Algeria into a colony that complemented the economy of the mainland, right, of the metropole, the French metropole. And so this meant planting loads of crops that were tropical in nature or that grew well in the Caribbean, for example, like cotton, tobacco, other crops. They realized that this didn't work, but what worked the best was actually the vines. But this posed a problem because it meant that wine made in Algeria was a rival to wine made in France, right? So there you can see that the French, being as restive and argumentative as they are, were not were not happy with the French that moved over to Algeria and became ultimately French Algerian winemakers. So we see it started gradually taking shape. Until the 1870s, I think, when so what happened was at this stage is that phylloxera ravaged the French vineyards, and ultimately this meant that the French were no longer self-sufficient in making wine. So this gave a lot of impetus to the government in Algeria, and with support from the French, to really turbocharge the wine industry. And this is what fed into essentially the French in Algeria, the French making of Algeria the biggest exporter of wine in the world and the fourth biggest producer. This is what happened. And of course, this came at the expense of the local population. Of course, exploitation, land taken from them, and then Algerians made to, indigenous Algerians made to work on that land. And what we saw was that Algeria became this huge maker of wine, despite the fact that 85% of the population was Muslim. So it really was a colonial enterprise. And when it came to the War of Independence, vineyards, because of their, if you want, colonial connotations, and because they were in the countryside, they became targets for the FLN, the Front de Libération Nationale, and these were the first theaters of battles and violence in the War of Independence. And so it's not an easy legacy, but following independence, Algeria still relied on wine exports for 50% of its export receipts. So it was still a vital industry for a young country. But as I said before, by the time we got to the 70s and we found oil and gas, and Boumediene, the second president, saw capital in, political capital in tearing up this vine, which was colonialist and immoral according to Islam in nature. We saw declines in this world. So in Algeria, I just wanted to say they in the 1930s at its zenith, they were exporting over 1.3 billion liters of wine a year, which is really quite crazy. It's a lot. It's really quite a lot of wine. Yeah. Today that number stands at around 300,000 liters. So you see the decline has been incredible.
Yeah.
But yeah, so with the Lebanese, it's funny link. The Jesuits, so the priests, they were the first ones who actually planted grapes in Algeria, and then the same ones went and did it in Lebanon as well, from Algeria. So they took les meilleurs cépages algériens, so the best Algerian grape varieties, and took them to Lebanon in the Bekaa Valley, and started producing wine there, right? And it's funny because they did it at the expense of the indigenous local grapes, which they found tougher to deal with. But so what they did is that they, in Lebanon, they made wine. Again, it was very ritualistic, only for kind of religious ceremonies, and just to be consumed by the brothers, by the priests and others within the church. and we see others coming up as well. Other groups, Christian groups making wine too, until we get to kind of around the 1920s. I think it was 1922, if I'm not mistaken, the Treaty of Sèvres, where the French came essentially came to Lebanon. They had the kind of Syrian mandate and brought over an army of soldiers and civil servants. Right, they were really thirsty, and so what we see in Lebanon is this like transformation of winemaking purely for priests and for religious, and everyone linked to the church and religious orders, to serving, this army of of French, and so we see the commercialization of these wine industries happening. And what's more interesting is that once this commercialization starts to take place, it's actually Lebanese themselves, such as Serge Auchard, who is the eponymous Chateau Mouzard founder. A mistake. Please correct me if it's not Serge. Maybe Gaston Auchard. I forget who the original Auchard was, but it was. This is the kind of we see now in Lebanon that the local Lebanese start to launch wine companies themselves, and they are essentially, all their demand is, all their production is drunk by the French.
Right.
Everything they make is absolutely taken by the French. Even, they go, you have officers, army officers who literally go to the vineyards, the wineries, and just and take every box they have. So it's a slightly different, if you want, what's the word? But yeah, it's slightly different to what we see in Algeria at this stage. And with the independence of Lebanon, again, I believe in 1943, all the French leave, or most of the French leave, and the Auchard and Van Akkad and stuff, and these winemakers, they kind of fear that they're going to fail now because most of their customers have just left. But in fact, the Lebanese were always quite cosmopolitan, and the Beiruti crowd were happy to kind of take on the French way of life and continue to drink Lebanese wine. And so we saw that. So we see that in Lebanon, it was a less complicated relationship with wine than the Algerians have.
Yeah, absolutely. And for people who don't know or forget, I mean, obviously, Lebanon is the land of the ancient Phoenicians who spread across the Mediterranean. They went all the way to North Africa. They had the colonies of Carthage and Spain, and they brought wine with them from the ancient lands of Phoenician lands. So I think there is a cyclical history of wine in this region. They exported, and then it was reimported or forcibly, in a way, reimported. They're kind of replacing the indigenous varieties or trying to. And then I guess now the Lebanese are trying to promote their own wine and their own grape varieties, right? And go back to their roots.
Absolutely, yeah. That's it's funny, because it's the Phoenicians that. They were the great traders, right, of antiquity, and they used to carry wine. They used to carry amphora of wine to the new colonies, as you mentioned, in North Africa and southern and Spain, and even in southern France. I think not far from Marseille. Yeah, they planted the seeds of those wine industries, and then. What, 2,000 over 2,000 years later, 2,500 years later, the French come back and they're like, "Oh, this is wine. We're bringing you wine, right?"
Yeah.
But yeah, now so as I've spoken about the French bought kind of dry style wine, right, and back to, if you want, to the Levant, to Lebanon, and now in the past 20 to 30 years, we've seen a kind of mushrooming of boutique Lebanese wineries that are looking for their own identity, or as I like to say, wine identity. So we see that. So the French did the same as in Algeria. They brought over Grenache, Cinsault, Carignan, There's even a bit of Syrah as well. All these are, Rhone varieties and kind of Spanish varieties. And so the Lebanese have embraced that as their own too, which is absolutely fine because, they have amazing climate in the Bekaa Valley and in the Lebanon mountains as well. But now we see them really transforming their own indigenous grapes, which have been there for thousands of years too. So the Obeidi, Merwah, Aswad, Asmi Aswad, and Aswad Karish. I need to remember the red grapes, but they're transforming these from sweet, sweet style wines that are used in religious ceremonies to dry style varieties that are then being sold not only domestically but also being sold internationally and exported.
Yeah.
It's like you said, it's really cyclical. The names are Asmi Noir and Aswad Kersh.
Okay.
The red grapes.
Great.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's wrap it up a little bit. Yeah, let's maybe. So, what's your favorite wine from these regions? What would you think is the best?
Yeah, it's a hard. That's a hard question.
Decision.
It's like asking someone who's your favorite child.
Yeah.
But it's I have to say the one I could drink repeatedly is the Algerian. There's an Algerian red, which is a blend of. It's a Grenache-led blend with Mourvedre, Carignan, and Cinsault, and it's delicious. It's called the Saint Augustin, and yeah, it's fantastic. It really is. It's kind of like medium bodied. There's a little bit of spice on it with kind of jammy kind of blackberry notes, violet as well. It's really well done, and it could challenge any expensive Grenache that you could find in Spain or France, right? So you have Châteauneuf-du-Pape, which has a lot of Grenache in it, and I'm not saying it's better than maybe Châteauneuf-du-Pape is obviously very well known, but you also have in Barcelona, you have like Priorat wines as well that are Grenache, majority Grenache too. So this wine, because of the climate, because of the knowledge of Algerian winemakers that are still present from just post independence, I feel like it could really stand on its own. I'm really quite impressed with that wine. And in Lebanon as well, the wines from their indigenous grapes, Obeidi, Merwah, they're fantastic. For example, the Obeidi, it's got sweet like honeydew flavors, but it has again good balancing acidity, and it could be linked to similar to kind of a Viognier or a Semillon or a kind of sweetish Riesling too. So it's exciting. It's exciting times because in the wine world, you go from trend to trend, and we've seen natural wines, organic, biodynamic natural wines coming through to mixed reception. I know a lot of people don't like the kind of overly fermented natural wines that taste a bit like IPAs or something for many people. But now we see through indigenous grapes, not only I have to say in the Middle East, in the Levant, but also Portugal, Sicily, in the Balkans, the Albania, Slovenia, then Hungary as well, Georgia, all these incredibly new and exciting, well, I don't want to say new because they're quite old, but new on the market, indigenous grape varieties, and we're almost spoiled for choice now. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm very excited with all these new old wines. I really like this exploration and adventure. You learn so much through that, and that brings me to something. So the grape Syrah in France and the Persian-Iranian region of Shiraz related in any way? Do you know?
Yeah, very good question. I read an article about it recently, which argued that they weren't so similar, and that there's no definitive proof of the two being connected, but this is also part of the kind of discovery through the Other Grape, is that the Arab / Muslim world is one where winemaking proliferated, right? And the region of Shiraz and Khorasan in Iran were huge winemaking centers. And you have poets at the time like Abu Nuwas and Omar Khayyam, who were Iranian / Iraqi of today's, if you want, today's kind of
geographical, political borders.
These, they were totally enamored with wine. It was a fundamental part of their culture. Their wine poetry, the khamariyat, right, which they wrote so beautifully, it really reflects that. So I wouldn't be surprised if there is a link. The Syrah is an indigenous, Southern Rhone variety. Like the DNA markers do show that that grows from from that region. But who's to not know that these this grape may have come from further back from this from Iran. I read that it was actually I think it was a British trader who, when taking the Syrah grape over to Australia, had misspelt it, or they had misread it, and so this is where the kind of name of Shiraz came about.
Right.
So it may be just a coincidence, but it's no coincidence that this place did have was like a huge wine center in antiquity. Well, not even so long ago, maybe 1500 years ago, 1400 years ago.
Yeah, definitely. Great. Thank you for spending your Sunday morning with me, talking about all this exciting wine from the Middle East and North Africa, the other side of the Mediterranean, the other grape. And looking forward to hear more of your adventures in the future.
Thank you, Thomas. It was a pleasure to speak to you about it. On a Sunday morning, you can't drink wine, so talking about wine is
the second best thing. Great, thank you.
Super, thank you, Thomas.
Thanks for listening. I've been Thomas Dinas, and this was the Delicious Legacy Podcast, part 4 of the history of wine. Join me next time, and let's find out together where this adventure takes us. Remember, if you are a Patreon backer, you get the episodes early and ad-free, and also you get extra content in terms of recipes and musings and writings and articles all about ancient gastronomy. Plus, you get video recipes from me, which they're coming now thick and fast. Stay tuned. Bye.